he immediately came off that mountain with a revelation of who he was and what he was here on this earth to do, and he began about his Father's business.
Welcome to Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You, the podcast that focuses on Christians that are active in everyday life. Join in as we speak to everyone from successful business owners to educators to athletes about their faith and how it helps them reach out and revolutionize those around them to do the same. And now get ready to roar with your host, the voice of manifestation, John Fuller.
Hey Roar Nation, John Fuller here, and before we get started today, I want to share with you one major thing that has made a difference in my life, and that's working out and nutrition. So besides staying mentally fit, it's important to take care of your body, right? And that means having more energy and more focus throughout the day. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have really long days, and I need every advantage that I can get to keep up with my 3 kids. So my wife, Casey, has created an amazing online program that walks you through step by step how to work out and what to eat. The best part about it is she's taken out all the guesswork and what to do and how to do it. She shows you everything. She shoots videos, answers questions, walks you through the whole process. And honestly, the best part about it, besides the last thing that I said, is it's less than $20 a month. I don't know of anywhere you can get such an amazing program for less than $20 a month. So if you will go to our website on areyoureal.org, you'll see a banner on the right side of my beautiful wife. And if you will click on the banner, it'll take you right where you need to go to get started. And the way we've done that is we've created it all through Facebook. So all you have to do is click on there and it will walk you through and put you into a small private Facebook community. And also all the time I get questions about supplements, what to take, how to take them, do they really work? And we've taken care of that also. If you will send me a message through our website or through Facebook on Are You Real, I will gladly send you some samples of my favorite products that I take every day that help me stay focused and full of energy. So again, Facebook me, private message, send me an email. I will send you samples for free to help you get started. Jump on there, click on the link, send me a message, and we just want to get you mentally strong, physically fit, and for you to be the best you can be. Have a blessed day. Hey Roar Nation, John Fuller here, and it is a beautiful day in West Texas. I am fired up and excited to introduce today's special guest, Ed Harris. Ed, you fired up and ready to go?
Oh yeah, baby.
All right, man, let's do this. So guys, Ed Harris has worked in the financial industry for over 14 years. He is passionate about equipping people with the wisdom and knowledge to manage their wealth, fulfill their unique given purpose, and advance the kingdom of God. Ed is an advisor, mentor, speaker, and author of Mountain Climbing Money. Now we're talking. All right, he is the CEO, securities offered through GF Investment Services, LLC, member of the FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Global Financial Private Capital, LLC, and an SEC-registered investment advisor. Ed, that last part makes no sense to anybody, but that's okay, because what you have to offer is phenomenal, man. Let's talk money, buddy.
Yep.
So, all right.
I definitely appreciate your time, John.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I want to dive into, we've talked in the past. I'm really excited for our listeners because I love the story behind of why you got into financial planning and money. I want to talk about that, but let's talk about your business right now, what you do, and your passion for Jesus.
Yeah, so my company is Harris Advisors, and I started this company because I've been like you mentioned, I've been in the business for a long time, and what I've seen though is that there are some challenges as it relates to consumers trying to find good advice. In most cases, people are walking in the door of some financial institution and they're sitting across from somebody who's really just a salesman. I don't say that in a derogatory way. Most of the people that I've run into in the business are really good people trying to help people, but they may not have the perspective of really, first of all, looking out for, really what's in the best interest of the family as opposed to just trying to quote unquote make some money for the client or something along that lines. And then, there's a lot of terminology and concepts in the business that are not, they're very relevant to the individual, to the family who's trying to build wealth. But the person sitting across the desk may not understand those concepts. And so that was kind of my motivation for starting the company, because I wanted to be able to do business a certain way. And I wanted to be able to get the message out as far as from an educational perspective, as well as from a kingdom perspective, because, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 19, the money answers all things. And so, if we're going to really make a difference in the world, we can't just pray about it. We've got to have money to do something about it.
Man, amen to that. So you mean we just can't sit there and just pray and not act on the concept?
Yeah.
Yeah, too many people do that, I think. I mean, it just differs. Different churches. I've been in a lot of different places, but I hear so many people, Christians, say that, well, I'll just pray about it and, I have faith. And I'm like, yeah, man, well, that sounds great. But, man, we gotta put some rubber to the road and get some action, baby.
Yeah, I call it God's ATM. A lot of people are waiting for God's ATM to show up, and it typically, sometimes it will. I mean, God's shown up miraculously in my life for sure. But ultimately, Jesus taught productivity. And that's something that is, I think purpose and having a way to actually be productive in that purpose is, something that sometimes is missing, which is, one of the concepts I deal with in the book. There's a story where there's a guy in the Bible where he built up some wealth, and then he said, you know what, I'm pretty wealthy, so I've got, I need to make some more room. So he tore down his barns, built bigger barns, and then he said he's going to sit back and relax and retire. Well, God killed him.
Yeah.
That's
hard for some listeners.
That'll tell you what God thinks about the typical concept of retiring to a life of leisure, right? So, that dynamic of having a mission, of actually working towards, a higher calling, which is something that a lot of people that I talk to are struggling to find, and so that dynamic is something near and dear to my heart. So I wanted to try to create a platform where people can have an opportunity to really dig into their identity and really even have a process to actually, walk down that path, as opposed to, just praying about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ed, is there like a success quote that you like, or inspirational scripture that you could give us that have really been foundational for you?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because when I was evaluating whether I was going to, start this business or just continue working for, the company that I was employed by at the time, what God kept telling me was, be about your Father's business. In Luke chapter 2, Jesus did something that that most parents would be pretty ticked off about. He ran away from home.
Yeah.
And, he ran away from his parents. But when his mother found him there at the temple, he didn't go there to actually pray, or he didn't go there to quote unquote be in his father's presence. He went there to be about his father's business. That's good. That's what I, when I was evaluating kind of what I was going to do with my career and with my time, it kept coming back to me that, I have to be about my Father's business, and that's bigger than just paying my bills, and it's bigger than just going to church. It's about taking the message that God put inside of me and getting it out there.
Okay, so I want to dive into that. You talk about doing your Father's business. Okay, so where in your life journey did you really step into this and you kind of had that moment like, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm going to do it? Can you take me there?
Well, you know what? I would say that it was a lot of steps. When I was 15 years old, I was sitting in church, and I really felt like God wanted to do something with my life. And at the time, all I knew was being a minister. Yes. So I started preaching. I became a licensed minister with the denomination that I was part of. And, so through high school, I was preaching.
Wow.
And then I went to Bible college, and, and then, it's interesting. At Bible college, I came to a place where, I went down there with the hopes that these teachers and professors and leadership would give me an opportunity to get closer to God and to teach me how to be a man, further than what I'd learned, growing up in a godly household. And, I ran into religion smack dab in the face. It was like a brick wall where, the biggest concerns that I ran into were, people worried about how I was dressed or, things that, in my opinion and in my experience at the time, God kind of saw them as silly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, then I came back and, thankfully, God, I grew up in a Baptist home, but after I came back from Bible college, I was filled with the Spirit. I started having kind of these amazing encounters where God started I started drawing closer to Him, and He was definitely drawing closer to me. And then at the age of 21 or so, I got connected with Kim Clement, where God called him to come to Detroit, which is where I'm from, and stay there. And so, he was an amazing mentor of mine and really poured into me, prophetically as well as a mentor to really help me realize that there was something unique about me. And so from there, Lance Wallnow actually became a mentor as well, because he was friends with Kim, and he would come into town every couple of months and teach us about, identity and kind of get into the technical side of things, as Lance has a tendency of doing. And, it really gave me the confidence and the courage to accept that, yeah, you know what, I may seem strange because I'm not like this person or that person, but ultimately God made me this way for a reason. And so if I could tap into those unique aspects of myself, then, then I could actually figure out what it was that God put me here on this earth to accomplish, what was really my purpose. And so about that same time, though, about the age of, 19 years old, I became fascinated with money. In the chapter of Luke, or in the book of Luke, I forget which chapter it is, John, but Jesus told a parable about a man who was getting fired. And this guy got fired, but then he said, you know what? I'm going to go around and renegotiate my master's debts.
I can't wait to hear your view on this, because this to me is just the most weird, if that's the word, passage.
Yeah, well, it was, and you'll have to clarify what aspect of it that you want me to dig into. But for me, when I read this at that time, and, the guy goes around and renegotiates his master's debts, and he comes back, and his master commends him. Now, it doesn't say that he got his job back, but his master commends him, and so did Jesus. And Jesus said, in this matter, the children of this world, or the children of this age, are oftentimes wiser than the children of light. Now, I realized when I saw that Jesus was talking about money. He was talking about business and finances. And God spoke to me and He said, you'll notice I made an observation. I didn't say it had to be that way.
Okay.
And to me, I just made a commitment right there. And I said, well, if you'll help me, I'll make sure I'm not one of those people. And so from there, this passion and desire for learning finances and economics and business just got ignited. And so I read everything I could get my hands on. I was reading the Harvard Business Review. Sometimes I'd have to read stuff with the dictionary next to me, but I just became absolutely fascinated with learning how money worked. And so from there, I was still being mentored by Kim and really involved in the meetings that we were having here in Detroit, which lasted for about 6-7 years, nonstop. I mean, it was basically, 4 or 5 nights a week, 3-4 weeks out of the month, nonstop. And so I worked full time, and then sometimes I was just working odd labor jobs to pay the bills. But the meetings and serving God was really my focus. And then, an interesting thing happened, though, John. I started having an identity crisis where I started seeing myself in light of the amazing aspects of other people. And, I really started struggling with that, where I was trying to be like somebody else.
Yes.
and which is common, right? I mean,
Oh yeah,
a lot of us
I
go
think
through times
all
like
of
that.
us. Yeah, I think a lot of us go through, and then we find ourselves even more frustrated because as we try to be like somebody else because we see it's working for them, it works even less, and then we get more frustrated.
Yeah, yeah. And so, but there was a time where the meetings had started kind of not, I wouldn't say fading, but Kim started coming back less and less to Detroit, and my involvement with him started fading, and I started looking at it. I thought I was going to be the next Kim Clement, to be honest. But that wasn't what God made me to be, right? Because I'm not Kim Clement.
Exactly.
And so, I started looking at it and kind of looking at my life and prayerfully considering kind of what the next steps for me were going to be. And thanks to the teaching and mentorship of Kim and Lance, I was able to look at myself from a different perspective and say, okay, I'm somewhere in the future and I'll look a lot better than I look like right now, which was one of the common phrases in our meetings with Kim. And I said, okay, well, here's the things that God has shown me about my future from prophetic words from Kim and Lance and other people, as well as kind of my own experiences with God. So, in light of that, and in light of the fact that God has put the desires of his heart on my heart, which finances was a big deal, helping people was a big deal. So I started looking at career options, and I said, I came across an opportunity to be a financial advisor. Now, I had no formal background in that. All the education and knowledge that I had on finances was self-educated.
Right.
And so, but I went for the interview, and the guy said it was the best interview he'd ever had.
Wow.
And so that's what started my career. And I've had ups and downs in my career, but ultimately, it's funny. I had a couple of really eye-opening experiences in my career where it was kind of God confirming to me that, hey, I built you for this. I was talking to a guy, and he was a prospect at the time. All I knew is the guy was rich, and he was a business owner. And so I called the guy who was referred to me, and I started talking to him about an opportunity. This was like 2000. Early 2009, late 2008, somewhere around there. And he started asking me, he said, okay, so what do you see as an opportunity right now? And so I started telling the guy about an opportunity, some dynamics in the municipal bond market that I saw as an opportunity. And he said to me, do you know what I do for a living? And I said, no, honestly, I don't. And he said, well, I'm a municipal bond underwriter. Now, I won't get into the details of that, but ultimately he builds municipal bonds for a living. And he's been doing it for like 30 years at the time.
Wow.
He's gotten rich doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so here I am. I'm talking to this guy who builds municipal bonds for a living. And I'm telling him about something I see in his market that is an opportunity. And so he says to me, he said, I've been doing this for a long time, but I never saw it that way.
It's a unique gift that God gave you that you have.
Yeah, and I realized, you know what, Ed? It wasn't intelligence that where, yeah, I mean, part of it was intelligence and my knowledge of the market, but it was really my perspective and the insight that God gave me into the markets that, and I'm not trying to say that, God tells me, what's going to happen next with the markets, even though I do feel like there is a degree of insight there because, just like Jesus got frustrated with his disciples once when he said, they started asking, when are you going to return? When are you going to return? And he was like, guys, you can look at the sky and tell what tomorrow's weather is going to be like. And you can't, you have to be able to interpret this times and seasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so, I do believe that, God kind of, built me and built my perspective and my, even the way my brain works, to be honest, to be able to, identify things like that.
I wanted to ask you this. You talked about when you went to Bible college that, obviously you're going to Bible college to get closer to God. it sounds to me like kind of find more purpose, what you're called to do and stuff. But then, you show up short there, but then you meet Lance and Kim and you get mentored. What was the difference between pursuing college? And I'm not knocking college. I mean, it's great. Some people need to go down that road, but for specific careers and fields of interest. But what was the difference between going to school and then getting mentored by somebody that could speak into your life, that just added value to your life? I mean, I think that was a huge shift for you, it sounds like.
It really was, John. I mean, honestly, I can't say enough about the impact that, particularly Kim. I mean, Kim was, I was with Kim virtually every day of my life for those years. And, to be under his ministry and his mentorship, and then Lance coming in and providing input, it was a stark contrast. And ultimately, it's funny because what I experienced with them was really what I went down to Bible college to get that I couldn't find. I couldn't find in a traditional religious education format. They were so understanding, and it was like, they really became spiritual fathers to me.
Yeah.
And it was, beyond, other pastors that I had been, I had in my life at the time and even previously, where they were really able to see where I was at and what I needed. And they were able to, to know that they were standing by me. There was a time when I was going through that transition. It was right after 9/11, and Kim was going to New York, and I wasn't working with him anymore. But I really wanted to go to this trip, and so I went to this trip. I paid my own way. I made it there, and we were having a meeting, and I was in the middle of this really big personal struggle. It was a really hard time in my life. And Kim started singing this song. It was something along the lines of, "I will pray for you. I will fight for you." And, he had the whole crowd singing it. And he called my name and he had me come up on the stage and he held my hand. I knelt down next to the piano and he held my hand and he was singing the song while he was holding my hand. And, it almost brings tears to my eyes right now, even telling the story. But it was such a touching time. And that really says a lot about Kim. And I'm fully convinced that God's going to restore him. But the heart of that man and the understanding and the patience and the love that he showed to me was really remarkable. It continues to inspire me today, John, to be honest.
Yeah. Take me to that moment. What was so powerful about that moment where he's sitting there holding your hand and what was going through your mind? I mean, it just kind of gives me chills just thinking about it.
John, it really, through my life, I went through a really hard time as a kid where, I was 8 years old and my brother Ricky passed away. And, it was just absolutely devastating to my family, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And, the challenges that I went through and the lost darkness that I was in, as a kid and growing up, and even, as a young minister, I was passionate about God and serving him because, ultimately when I was alone in my room and I was really alone in life, my parents, they just went through, the most horrifying experience that a parent could ever imagine. And so there was a lot of, challenges. I always knew my parents loved me, but they, as you can imagine, they didn't really know how to deal with this situation any better than anybody else. Right.
Yeah. And
so, I really felt alone in a lot of cases. But God would come to me and meet me when I was alone in my room. And no matter how messed up my life was, no matter how messed up, my actions were, because I was being in a lost place. There were a lot of cases where, I made a lot of big mistakes that, I have a really deep compassion for, what most people criticize people for doing. The actions that a lot of people want to point fingers at, because there's not too much in life that I haven't done.
Yeah.
And so, that love that I experienced, where I just knew God was with me. God loved me. I could feel it. He'd come and wrap his arms around me when I was a little boy and even as a teenager. And I felt that night when Kim was holding my hands. I felt that. And it was just amazing to know. It's one thing to know that God loves you and to experience that in your prayer time. It's another thing to feel it coming from a person that you look up to.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, the most powerful thing, to know that somebody at Kim's level and the kind of that spiritual father, to know that that he was expressing that love that God had for me, and that he shared that. That was really powerful for me, John.
Yeah, I love that story. I bet it was. Where do you feel that place of pain that you went through with your brother, and I experienced the same thing in my life? Where do you feel that pain has come to a place of rain, which you've heard? So you talk about compassion and things. So what's the flip side of that has given you for people of going through all these hurts and these things you've gone through in your life?
I think compassion, John. I don't want to call out anybody, any specific people group or anything like that. But, when we look at the social dynamics of the world today, and a lot of Christians are quick to criticize and to point fingers, and, Jesus walked a life where he was called a drunk, and he was criticized for hanging around with prostitutes. He lived a life where he was involved with people that the religious community criticized.
Yeah.
He lived with them. And it's just like the woman, the prostitute that Jesus rescued from being stoned, right? I mean, Jesus had a degree of compassion that religion just couldn't express. And that's where, for me, that pain, on one hand, there's motivation, because I know if I've gone through that and can sit here with a smile on my face and be confident that God's with me, and that I belong, that I have a voice, that I have something to contribute. That speaks mountains. And on the and then the compassion that God's shown me. Like I said, I can look at these people, these social groups, and I can disagree with the actions people are taking, but I can have compassion on them, because it's not the people, it's the spiritual force that we need to be angry with.
Yes, man. I'm
right?
glad you brought that up. Absolutely. We're fighting against principalities and powers, influencing people.
Yeah. And so, pointing fingers and yelling at people and telling them how bad they are, you're never going to get anywhere like that. Right? You're never going to influence culture. You're never going to influence people's lives by doing that. But that's regretfully the face that the Christian community has put out there to the world as it relates to these social issues, like the LGBT community, and on and on and on. That community has seen the Christian community with looking at them with an angry face.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, it made me think about, going back to the story where Jesus is with the lady and he draws the line in the sand. I'm thinking about it from Passion of the Christ, because Mel Gibson does such a brilliant depiction of that when she's brought to his feet. And in the Gospels, you don't see Jesus sitting there saying, "You slut, you whore,
right?
Look what you've done, you piece of crap. You need to repent and go to the temple and give a sacrifice." He doesn't say any of that.
Yep.
I mean, he doesn't. She already feels like a piece of crap, and she already knows she's living a lifestyle she really doesn't want to live, but she's trapped in it somehow. And he speaks to her spirit and tells her she's forgiven. Just don't do it anymore. I mean, in a sense, he's saying, "I love you. I forgive you. Just quit doing what you're doing." But he doesn't condemn her. He doesn't make her feel any worse than she already does.
Yep.
And that's what we have done, I believe, and you're right, is a face of Christianity throughout America. That's why you see people with I can't remember
the LGBT.
Yes, those
Yep.
and stuff like that. That, I mean, no duh, they hate Christians. I would too if
Yeah.
I was them. I mean, come on, let's use some common. Anytime it's like somebody standing on the street corner and saying, "You're a sinner, you're going to hell." Well, golly, man, I just don't really feel like going to church and asking the pastor to walk me through the process when you tell me I'm a piece of crap.
Yeah, I mean, John, I love God. But when I see those people on the street corner, which thankfully doesn't happen very often, but when I do, I don't want anything to do with them.
No, I mean, there's nothing.
What do you think? Somebody who's not a believer, or people I talk to that aren't believers, they're completely disenfranchised from religion, because they see religion as this structure of control.
Yes.
Whereas they need answers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I had an experience once when I was praying. This is during the time of, being mentored by Kim and Lance. And, I had this amazing experience in, I got caught up in a vision where, and I don't tell people a lot of this stuff because I think people tell stories too much about kind of bragging about their, anyways. But, I'm praying and, I was laying down on my face and just bawling. And I saw this vision where I saw a veil with an angel standing next to it. And the angel peeled back the veil, and I went into this room, and it was in my experience, it was the Holy of Holies. Yeah, I saw the ark sitting there with menorah next to it, and the layout, and there was a figure standing behind it. And it had the body of a lamb standing upright as a man, and the body was dirty, and the wool was torn and bloody. It had been the lamb had just been absolutely destroyed, but it was standing there, and there was a shadow where I couldn't see the lamb's face. And so then I heard a voice say to me, "Look at his face." And I looked at the lamb's face, and it was my face.
Wow.
And I just absolutely lost control, just crying and sobbing and just emotionally it was like I was laughing and crying at the same time. It was just kind of emotional destruction where my emotions didn't even know what to do. And God spoke to me and he said, "That's how the world needs to see you if you're going to represent me. They need a savior." Now, there was only one Jesus Christ, right? There was only one savior of humanity.
Right.
But when we interact with people, we have to come to them with that type of compassion, and where we have to be willing to be crucified. We have to, and not, obviously, I mean, there are people literally being crucified today, but in America, thankfully, we don't have to suffer that degree of persecution, but we have to be willing to suffer a bit, right? We have to be willing to take up our cross and go with a face of love and sacrifice, where we can have compassion on people and not tell them how bad they are or how wrong they are for their actions, but actually meet them where they are and have answers. Sometimes that shows up as spiritual gifts. Sometimes it just shows up with straight up answers in friendship and love.
Yeah, man, absolutely. What do you, I love your heart on this, but where do you feel like your biggest strength and gifting in the area of your compassion, whatever strengths you have with money, financial? I mean, what's your biggest strength and all that? How does all that tie together? Because I think so many times, listeners, I was talking to a guy a couple of days ago about coaching him, and he's just bouncing around. He's like, "Man, I love the Lord. We go to church, we do ministry." He tells me about his interests, things he likes. He's like, "But I don't know how to tie all that together." And I get that a lot. How do you tie all that together, Ed?
You know what? For me, John, and this is kind of, my version of it, of, a concept that, well, I won't get into that, but, for me, God's given me this concept of a bullseye. And, if you think about the word sin, it's pretty common knowledge that the word sin translated in the Hebrew, in the original Hebrew and the original Greek language, it simply means missing the mark. Now, I like to shoot stuff. And so for me, a bullseye is a very relevant concept.
Right.
And so, I started thinking about it, particularly as I, was writing the book and, starting the company and everything. And for me, that bullseye, it's an intersection of three aspects of my life. On one hand, you've got my passions, which is where, the financial, the passion behind financial things comes in, the passion to serve people and to serve God. Then, my own personal natural abilities, which again, as I mentioned with my stories, as it relates to my career and, it's definitely shown up where I've got some natural abilities there, right? Some God-given, I was created to be in this industry. And then also kind of my personality. And, I'm built a certain way. My emotions, my psyche, the way I express myself, there's nothing wrong about it. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is Moses is coming down off the mountain with Joshua. And the children of Israel had created the golden calf because Moses had been gone so long, and to them, he represented God. And so, that disconnect, they decided, well, we'll just make our own God, right? And so Moses and Joshua are coming down off the mountain, and they get within earshot of the celebration taking place down below. Moses turns to Joshua and he says, "What do you hear?" And Joshua says, "It sounds like the sound of war." And, I realized, I read that again as a young man, and, I am built to fight. I am an aggressive personality. I'm completely content with conflict. I like taking chances. I love risk. And so the dynamic of that conflict, which most people try to avoid conflict, I enjoy it. And so, that when I read that day, God spoke to me and said, "You see, some people are just built that way, right? Some people are built to fight. Some people are built to attack." Now, I had to learn, and that's part of, the mentorship of Kim and Lance and, and others, and part of it was the challenges of life. God just kind of teaching me how to control that aspect of myself. But at the same time, I came to a place where I could accept that that's who I am and that's who God made me to be. And so that intersection, if you think of that bullseye being split up into three different sections of a pie, right? One being my natural abilities, one being my personality, and one being my passions, that intersect is the bullseye, right? And that's where, the book, what I'm trying to accomplish with my business, in the business with Harris Advisors, I really work to partner with, families that have gotten to a level of success where I can really make a significant impact. But then there's a lot of other people where they may not be at that place where they need to pay for somebody like me, but they still need help, which is why, through the book and the mountain climbing money curriculum that I'm building, that's where, for people that may not be at the point where they need to pay for somebody like me, but they still need help, right? They still need to know how to protect their families, how to build wealth, how to what they've got a couple bucks in the bank. What should they do with it? What kind of perspective should they have as they're starting their careers or building a career? That's where that intersect comes in. And the expression for me and hitting that bullseye for me is really the marriage of the two. Not only working with clients in a partnership level, but also communicating to kind of the masses like Jesus did, where, people need to learn how the kingdom works as it relates to money.
Yeah.
So that they can actually protect their family and be a wise servant and do, the Bible says that a man who doesn't take care of his family is worse than a non-believer.
Man, that ain't no joke. There's some men, especially younger generation, but I'm around older guys too, man. They need to hear that with a baseball bat.
Yeah, and that's the thing where, the concept, emotional intelligence is something that, actually, Lance, I got that. I first learned about that term through a prophecy that Lance gave me in 1995. So I became fascinated with that concept. And, one of the pillars of emotional intelligence is personal responsibility.
Yeah.
I won't take the time to dig into the emotional intelligence too much right now, but personal responsibility has got to be a pillar of our walk with God. It's all through the Bible. Jesus was very strong about personal responsibility if you actually can see it. And that's where I think religion has cloaked the eyes of believers in a lot of cases, where they can't see their role in the calling of God. They're waiting for God to put them in a place where they can fulfill their calling, but we actually have responsibility in putting ourselves in that place in a lot of cases. There's some components to that we can't control, which is where God comes in.
Right.
But there's plenty of components that we do control. Our daily actions, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's where that personal responsibility, Kim said something to me one time in his mentorship. He said, we should pray like it's all up to God, but then get off your knees and act like it's all up to you.
Man, that's wisdom. That's a lot of wisdom right there, and practical.
Yeah. And, it's oftentimes a challenging thing because, lethargy and apathy are some really big enemies. But we have to take action. We have to just do something. Sometimes we just have to do what we have to do.
Just go do something. Yeah, there's two things I want to hit on. We're going to get a little sidetracked. We won't go too far, but you talk about, we'll talk about this off air, but this was good. You talk about personal responsibility and emotional intelligence. Immediately I thought about the Lord gave me some revelation in Genesis where, part of the problem is when he went to Adam and gave Adam the opportunity to take responsibility for his sin, what does he do? He passes the responsibility off and says, man, that ain't my fault. That was the woman you gave me. In essence, you did it, I didn't. And he never took responsibility right there for his sin.
Yep, that's great.
And because he didn't take that responsibility, he lost communication with the father and ends up getting kicked out of his house. But anyways, I mean, there's a lot there. But, man, you got me excited about this. So just kind of a quick revelation. Just going to throw it out to the listeners. I'm not even saying this is fresh, hot off the press. But you talk about sin equals missing the mark, right?
Yep.
And you're talking about the bullseye being the mark. Well, man, maybe as Christians and as a church, we have focused so much on the sin when in fact the mark is our purpose. Yep. And without Jesus and without the Holy Spirit and confessing our sin, coming into that relationship, we never truly fulfill our purpose because the mark, God gave us the mark. We just can't hit it we just can't hit what we were designed for without the Lord.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, John, because there was a good portion of my life where I was so beat up, and I beat myself up, and religion was beating me up, and I felt so condemned because of all the things that I was doing that were off target, right? Yeah. And instead, if I were able to focus on what the target was, and the target for me. Throughout my life, I've gotten more and more clarity on what that is, right? I'm 42 years old right now, and I've got a ton of gray hair, and I've earned those gray hair. But the dynamics of looking at, what am I going to do today? Now, I can beat myself up for the things that I shouldn't have done yesterday or the things that I should have done that I didn't do. Or I can look at today and say, okay, what can I do today that will hit that bullseye? Right?
Yeah.
Prayer is part of that. Worship is part of that. Being in communion with people is part of that. But I have to do something today, like broadcasts like this, or like what you're doing with your podcasts and your coaching and even your business, right? I mean, there's things that we can do which may start off small, but if you're hitting that bullseye, then you're expanding your sphere, right? Because the gift will ultimately make room for itself. And so I think a lot of times people are waiting to get a big platform. But, when Jesus came out of the wilderness, he just started talking.
Yeah.
He didn't immediately, he started talking and doing what he started hitting his bullseye. And then the masses came.
Absolutely. He went and did.
Right?
Yeah.
He did what he was called to do, what he was put on this earth to do, which was preach the kingdom to the masses. Part of that showed up in demonstration by healing the sick, raising the dead, and casting out demons. But part of it was just him teaching the kingdom. He immediately came off that mountain with a revelation of who he was and what he was here on this earth to do. And he began about his Father's business. The multitudes come when you're doing what you're called to do. You don't immediately step in front of the multitudes or in front of a big stage at a big conference. You have to start off by doing what you're called to do, and then the audience shows up. And that, I think, is a big frustration for a lot of people, and it has been for even me, where I'm comfortable in front of a TV camera. I'm comfortable in front of an audience. But even when there's not an audience there, I have to still be about my Father's business.
Absolutely. When you were talking about that, made me think. I was just writing a side note. But when I focus on my purpose and who I am and how God created me, I don't want to go out and sin because then I'm outside of my purpose.
Yeah, you have focus. Yeah. There's an analogy that I heard a long time ago about race car drivers and some of the training that they go through. And there's this concept of keeping your eyes focused on where you want to go. I forget who it was. It may have been Dale Earnhardt or some famous. It was some famous NASCAR driver where he had recently been in a car accident on the track, he avoided a car accident on the track, and he was skidding off into the wall, but he was able to pull himself out of it. And he was being interviewed afterwards. Please forgive me if I'm wrong on the story, if someone else is familiar with it, but it was something along this lines. But he was being interviewed afterwards, and they said, how were you able to pull yourself out of it? And he said, well, I was focused on where I wanted to go, not where my car was going, but where I wanted to go.
Woo, man, that's good.
So the car was headed into the wall, but he was able to steer out of it because he was able to focus on where he wanted to go instead of where momentum was taking him. And that's a big challenge for a lot of people, I think, where, we're oftentimes faced with challenging circumstances, particularly when it relates to money, right? I mean, there's a reason why money is the number one cause of divorce. Wow. It's a big factor in a lot of suicides and a lot of, you look at crime, right? I mean, there's a reason why, the money and greed and, the Bible talks about the love of money as the root of all evil, right? But a lot of times people are doing things for financial reasons that are detrimental to society and to their own lives, when if they really just focused on where they want to be instead of where they are, right? Yeah. We get into financial troubles and we make bad financial decisions, even as believers, people that have high ethical and moral standards. But we make bad financial decisions because we're not able to focus on where we want to be. Instead, we're focused on where we are and trying to get out of that. But if we focus on where we want to be, focus on what we want next year to look like, then it puts us in a powerful position to make financial decisions that will actually get us out of the trouble. Instead, we oftentimes, in trying to get out of the trouble, we actually oftentimes, kind of find ourselves in a worse shape. There's an old parable that says, if you find yourself in a hole, put the shovel down.
Good proverb.
Yeah.
I like that. All right, so let's jump in real quick to the Kung Fu round. We're going to start wrapping this up. What's a recent book that you've read that's impacted you that you would share with us?
You know what? There's a book by Simon Sinek. Start with Why.
Okay.
That is a book that for a business owner, for even just a person, in all honesty, that was a big contributor to that bullseye concept for me, because he talks about in that book, with marketing from a company perspective. Most companies try to market their products and they focus on the products and the features of the product, whereas instead, if we focus on why, why is the company in existence? And he uses Apple as an example in a lot of cases because, even if you go back to the early '90s when Apple first started, Apple was started by Steve Jobs, and the why behind Apple was they wanted to make electronics personal.
Yeah.
It wasn't about utility anymore. It was about a personal experience. And having electronics be a personal experience or a personal extension of you. That's where the iPhone came from. I saw an interview with Steve Jobs where he talked about that. He wanted to make a device that would create a personal connection between you and your device. That's how he came up with the idea of the iPhone.
Wow.
And so that why, and if you look at even, I think, I'm not as confident with Tim Cook's leadership of Apple as I was with Steve Jobs, but under Steve Jobs, the communication, the marketing of the company, even if you look at the iPod device, right? When the iPod first came out, what you saw was a video of people dancing around with their iPhone.
It was an experience.
It was an individual experience with you and your device. That's what they marketed. They didn't talk about, they didn't talk a lot about how many songs or how many gigs the device could hold, or no, it was about enjoying your device, right?
They were selling the experience, not necessarily what it could do. They were selling the experience.
Yeah, and so that why, for me as a entrepreneur and even me as a person, if I can remember why am I doing this? Why did God, even, from a spiritual perspective, why did God put me on this earth? Right? I'm here in this generation with this personality, these natural abilities, these passions. I'm here for a why. There was an idea. You talked about the Garden of Eden. Before that experience that Adam had, God knew me, God knew you, God knew the listeners, right? And He had in mind that we would be born in this generation with these natural abilities, with these passions, with these interests, right? With these personalities. He knew us then. And so if we can stay focused on why did God put us here? That's enough motivation to keep you going for your lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. I'm loving that. All right, I want to ask you, Ed, if you got a chance to go back to the younger you, what age would you go to and what advice would you give yourself?
I would say I would go back to the Bible college me, or my teenage years.
Okay.
And I would tell me to shut up. I think a lesson that's been really hard for me to learn, part of it comes from my aggressive nature, right?
Yeah.
But it took me, it's been really hard for me to learn some lessons. And where if I could have learned at a younger age to just be quiet, take the lumps, and be a good student of life. That's what I would tell the younger me. Be a good student of life. Pay attention to what life is teaching you, because God is in that, right?
Yeah.
The betrayals that I experienced, in some cases they were legitimate betrayals. In some cases they were perceived betrayals. They weren't really betrayals at all. They were really God's hand, right? But those experiences in life that were most challenging, where I oftentimes overstepped my boundaries or I said things that I regretted later, if I could have just been a better student of life and focused on, developing that bullseye, focused on developing really focus in life. That's what I would tell the younger me.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'm with you too. I'd go back and tell myself to shut up a couple times myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ain't no joke, man. All right, Ed, I love your stories, man. I've loved talking to you. You have a lot of wisdom. I really thank you for all for your time sharing about money and finances and things like that. What is a piece of parting advice that you would like to leave our listeners? You know what?
I think ultimately, I think a fundamental concept that we touched on already is personal responsibility. And if I could, the advice that I would give the listeners would be the advice that Kim gave me. Pray like it's all up to God, but then get off your knees and act like it's all up to you.
Man, we'll leave it at that one. That's awesome. All right. So for our listeners that need financial help, I think every one of my listeners deals with money, both great and small. How do we find you, man? Because so far what I've read in your book, I've really enjoyed. There's a ton of wisdom in there. Where do we find you, your book, and if we want you to come speak, minister, or help us with finances?
There's I have a website. It's www.harrisadvisorsonline.com. And then the book Mountain Climbing Money is on Amazon. I can be contacted through the website. There's a contact page. My email for general contact information is info@harrisadvisorsonline.com. If somebody has questions, and just so you know, John, I will be beginning a broadcast next week on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay.
Where people can email me questions. They can get as specific as they want, but any personal information will remain anonymous, of course.
Awesome.
But I'll be covering various topics, both spiritual and financial, as well as if anybody has any direct questions, they can email me, and I'll do my best to answer the questions in that broadcast.
Man, I'm excited for that. I'll be jumping on there myself. And I do want to tell you before we depart real quick is just a little bit of, as I was praying for you before we started, I just really heard the Lord saying that you bring joy. You have the gift of safety and comfort, that you bring joy, safety, and comfort to those around you, which obviously sounds like to me it goes great with the services you provide, but that also that God's given you the gift of giving people smooth transitions. And I don't believe that is just for finances. I think that is in all areas of life. So that's a gift that God's given you of smooth transitions. So
I love it.
Awesome. So, Ed, hold on for a minute. Listeners, I want to tell you all the resources, Ed's website, his book, all that will be linked up on our website. Please check it out. The guy is full of tons of good information, so I highly recommend it. He will be on our front page as our guest. You can type him in the bar, and it'll also show up as well. So, listeners, thank you this week. Please rate and review us. Go on our website. And for those of you that don't know, we are going to be launching a course soon and be doing some coaching on finding your purpose. If you want to find your purpose, your skills, gifts, and talents, we are going to be helping you with that. If you will go to our Contact Us page, send me a message, and I can forward that and also sign up for our newsletter. So at the end of the day, guys, we love you. Be real, be authentic, and be you. God bless.
That's all for this episode of Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You. Be sure to go to areyoureal.org for your free questionnaire to identify your gifts and talents and how you can use them to help people become leaders and catapult them into their destiny to help others become the leaders of tomorrow. We appreciate you spending your time with us and look forward to helping you reach out and revolutionize next time on Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You.